Good morning and happy Halloween, everyone. Sean Presley here, and I'm going to be talking today about book report number 2, Camille Bégin, Taste of the Nation, a New Deal Search for America's Food. So, Taste of a Nation examines how food, taste, and region help shape American identity during the New Deal. The book focuses on the Federal Writers Project, known as the FWP, and its America Eats archive, which collected descriptions of local food traditions across the country. Begin's main argument is that the sensory experience of how people talked about, remembered, and reacted to food was key in building a shared national story. She shows that taste was never neutral, but rather it reflected class, religion, race, and belonging. The book begins with an introduction that defines the idea of sensing food in the 1930s. So Chapter 1, America Eats, the Making of a Sensory Archive, explains how the FWP writers attended fish fries, church suppers, barbecues, and community events to capture what and how Americans ate. Chapter 2, The Romance of the Homemade, explores nostalgia and the meaning of home cooking during economic hardship. Chapter 3, Tasting Place, Sensing Race, analyzes how regional foods became symbols of pride and exclusion. Chapter 4, American Culinary Heritage, Mexican Food of the Southwest, examines how Mexican-American foods were both celebrated and othered. And then, of course, Chapter 5, A Well-Filled Melting Pot, looks at the immigrant cuisines and their position in the story of national unity. So the conclusion of this book, How Taste is Made, ties the argument together, showing how sensory experiences help shape American identity. So, Begin's research, she uses the FWP's America Eats material as primary sources, which includes letters, essays, menus, recipes, and even photographs. She reads these as sensory documents and not just simply factual accounts. When looking at it through this lens, she argues that historians can recover how Americans felt about eating, not only just what they consumed. Taste became kind of an evidence of this. It became something emotional and cultural that can reveal how people define themselves and others. She also highlights the FWP writers as participants who shaped the narratives. The reports often reflected personal preferences and prejudices, including how individuals' taste could mirror national tensions. The method is both archival and interpretive, drawing attention to how people's sensory experiences, such as smell, texture, flavor, and even the sound of food, capture historical meaning that might otherwise be lost. I do want to talk about sensory economics and include a personal reflection here. So, Begin's introduces the concept of sensory economics, which is the idea that taste and preference circulate through families, regions, and time periods, shaping identity long after food itself is gone. Reading this section reminded me of my own family, which I've brought up from time to time, and how our relationships with food echoes the same economy of taste, scarcity, and emotion. So I'm going to tell a little story about my great-grandmother. She was born in the late 1880s. She came to Texas in a covered wagon. But when she settled here, and she was my great-grandmother when I was a child, in her garage she used to keep dozens of wooden crates of Dr. Pepper. And bottled Dr. Pepper, not the canned stuff, the bottled stuff, in her garage. And it was from floor nearly to the ceiling and almost covered the entire wall of the garage itself. But each one of those bottles, despite the fact that there was hundreds of them, were precious to her, to the point that she would only drink one bottle a day. She would only let my brother and I have one bottle each when we were there visiting. Yet every time she would go to the grocery store, she would always buy a new case. The reason why is that she had this terrified fear that she was going to run out, which used to make my brother and I laugh. But that was an instinct that came to her because she lived through the Great Depression, when scarcity was a constant presence in the everyday life of most Americans. For her, taste was more than just what you get from food. it was also tied to survival. That sweet, fizzy Dr. Pepper wasn't just a soft drink to her. It was a reward, a constant reminder of security that could vanish at any time. My paternal grandmother carried a similar lesson, though in a little bit of a different form. From the 1940s to near the end of her life, she used to keep a large garden in her backyard. She would grow tomatoes, corn, beans, okra, lettuce, all kinds of things. Even though she could go to the grocery store and get most of the stuff, she preferred to grow her own food. And she did it both as a form of habit and a form of exercise, but she also did it as a form of memory. This happened when my grandfather was in World War II, and as we've talked about in the class, the concept of victory gardens, it was something that carried with her. She also was a survivor of the Depression and lived through part of the Dust Bowl. So these things factored into it. These habits of hers represented a continuity and control, the way to taste the fruit of her own labor while remembering the years where it was really hard not only to find food to eat, but what you had to ration. So the smell of freshly turned soil, my grandfather's compost pile, all these things, even the feeling of the warm sun as she was out there harvesting ripe tomatoes became a part of not only her sensory memory, but also our family as well. As we became older, we participated in the harvesting of the garden. Anything from picking tomatoes to shucking corn to snapping peas and beans. This was just part of what we did, and it became a living archive of care and resourcefulness. Now, both of these women, my great-grandmother and my grandmother, embodied the same principles that Bégin describes. A taste is not simply about flavor, but about emotion, history, and security. Their habits connected to a larger national pattern of sensory economy where scarcity, memory, and comfort shaped what Americans valued. Their stories help me see that how the sensory past that Bégin describes still lingers in everyday life. So Taste of the Nation gave me a new appreciation for how histories use sensory evidence to study food. Her argument pushed me to think about taste as a form of knowledge. The American Eats Project captured not just recipes but also feelings, things such as nostalgia, pride, and belonging that define a generation then, but it continues to define generations today. Before reading this book, I hadn't really considered how describing a meal could serve as historical evidence, but now I see how these records reveal and how it shapes how people thought about themselves and as far as who they were. So two ideas really stood out with me through this. The first is that the senses can preserve memory even when documents fade. The second is that race, class, and place have always been shaped as what counts as American food. So I grew up in a town called Cleveland, Texas, which is about 45 minutes or so south of here. Our town was a nice blend of white, black, Hispanic, and we even had a small Asian community growing up. Many of my closest friends came from all these different backgrounds, and because of that, I was exposed to all sorts of food and family traditions. As a result, things like tamales became a Halloween staple in my household, which I will be having tamales and chili tonight. Simmering collard greens were actually a weekly side dish in my family. We used to have fried chicken, fried fish, and then, as I've said before, we had more casseroles than any church potluck could ever put together. All of this shaped not only me, but also how I understand community. It reinforced my belief in the American melting pot concept and the ideals of the melting pot of America. My life has definitely been richer, tastier, and more grounded because of the foods I shared with these people and they shared with me, and the friendships that it formed and what it represented for us. So overall, Bégin's approach deepened my understanding of how food historians study culture. Her work makes clear that studying food means studying people, studying their memories, their habits, their emotions, as much as their ingredients and techniques. It reminded me that the simple act of eating food holds history in every single bite we take or every sip of Halloween coffee. Thank you. Have a great day.